So next, I'm excited to have a fireside chat with CJ, CEO of MongoDB. CJ has had a front row seat to what AI adoption is looking like in large enterprises, what's working, what's not working, and I'm looking forward to digging into that and much more with him. So let's give a warm welcome to CJ.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Did you pay him to say those nice things about Mongo?
I was really surprised. And you guys can hear me okay? All right. I was really surprised, and it felt really nice. I'm like, my job is done. I don't need to do this fireside chat.
Yeah, well, no, we'll keep you around for a little bit. But okay. Yeah, that was great to hear. So I think I'm assuming most people in the room are pretty familiar with Mongo. I used it heavily at my old job at Robust Intelligence. Our entire stack was built there. It's obviously been around for a number of years. AI has been this new thing that's popped up or a new type of AI has popped up in the past 2-3 years. How has Mongo thought about what's worked in this AI era from previous Mongo, and has Mongo had to add more things to make it better for this agentic era, better for AI?
Yeah, so MongoDB, I would say started, of course, as an open source database company, and that's why we love partnering with LangChain, because we have similar ethos, philosophy on how we build products, what do we put in our open source version versus our enterprise version. But the company was created in 2007, and the founding principles were very, very simple. The founding principles were, you need a modern database that is not bounding you by rows and columns, and you can move fast as you build applications. So agility was a very important design principle with document model. Second is commodity hardware and scale-out architecture, which was, AWS was just coming online. So to build in the cloud rather than a scale-up architecture. And I would say the third thing is probably the best database for unstructured data, right? And most people looked at it and said, okay, document model, unstructured data, JSON, things like that. And coming to your AI question, AI is all about unstructured data. I mean, even if you use your popular GPT version or whatever it is, you're creating an image. I send lots of silly memes to my kids by creating something. And you want to store all that. So we are like the best database for unstructured data in AI. And it is almost a coincidence. That is not what was created by the founders who did a great job. And then the last thing I would say on your question is, what we added is native search and vector search, so hybrid search. And that's where we both have partnered so that you can easily retrieve something. And we added embeddings last year, Voyage AI team right here in out of Stanford. So that's what we did for AI workloads. So that's, Harrison, the summary.
One of the things that I've found really fascinating when chatting with you is the different types of companies that are using you for different types of things, all under this umbrella of AI. But there's startups, there's enterprises, there's the labs, and they're all using you for slightly different things. Yeah. Could you talk about that and share the trends that you're seeing in terms of usage patterns?
Yeah, so just one thing is I'm obsessed about speaking to at least 10 customers a week. And I've done that for pretty much my entire career. So if you think about how many customers, enterprise customers I speak to and learn from them on what's going on, that is truly something I like to do so that you understand what's going on, what's really working, how things are changing, whether it's cloud, AI, landscape, and so on. So for MongoDB specifically, we found out that frontier labs use us for different use cases, okay? So that's one class of, very unique class of customers. And successful frontier labs are, you can count them on fingers. Some of them are using us for research, because think about research, training data, lots of unstructured data. You'll put PDFs in, voice, et cetera. So they use MongoDB for research before they ship their 4.x, 5.x, whatever model they ship. There are some Frontier Labs company are using us for inference layer, chat conversations, long-term memory, what kind of searches I did, and all the data that gets stored. And then we have AI native companies. Last week, with their permission, we announced that ElevenLabs, so they are built in a particular hyperscaler. They made this mistake, and I'm just going to say it. They made this mistake of using the first-party database from that hyperscaler. It didn't scale. And these guys are creating, their superpower is text-to-speech. They were created post-ChatGPT era. And they do small language models for text-to-speech and speech-to-text. And once they move to MongoDB, they have now 40 million production agents built on MongoDB. So AI native company, and they hit 500 million ARR. I mean, it is insane how fast they are growing because they focused on voice as the modality. And for customer support, those kind of use cases or sales. And the last is enterprises, where we have worked together. Enterprises will say, hey, CJ, we are using LangChain for this orchestration. By the way, my team wanted me to tell you, we use deep agents and built some agents, and we are very, very happy. So thank you for that. Yes, and we are building lots of agents internally for use cases. So enterprises, in the classic enterprises, we have most of the banks that run mission-critical workloads, payment types, tech companies are built on MongoDB. Adobe, for many of their products, which has a lot of unstructured data, those products are built on MongoDB. So we go all the way from labs to AI natives to enterprises.
Let's maybe talk about our integration together for a second. So you have a really nice way of putting it, I think, which is you talk about like the three legs of a stool, the LLM, the data, and the harness. Can you walk through that and talk about how all of those relate, and then maybe talk about some of the stuff that we're doing together to make that even more seamless?
Yeah, so first time I met Harrison, because the teams told me engineers, or developers, builders, when they work together, given the very similar design principles we have about how we build products, open source, and all of that, is this was not a top-down integration done between LangChain and MongoDB. Is that engineers were asking for it, whether it's vector search, hybrid search, you have long-term memory store, graph rag, lots of things. So those integrations were built even before this partnership was formal. So it was bottoms up, and we are, similar to LangChain, extremely developer friendly. So if you want something, we want to do it, right? An example of our Atlas DB hybrid search that we did specifically for integration with LangChain, it is something that just made sense that in the harness layer, if you are doing a retrieval on vector search, we should make it easy for the developers to do that so they can use our data store. So I am a firm believer is one, in the open ecosystem, because even the labs will ask you to build a harness layer on top of them, and I've seen some announcement, right? Hyperscalers will also try to lock you in all the way from harness layer to the data layer that I was talking about with ElevenLabs. And I think that we want a full open ecosystem for all of you to be able to say, harness layer should work across any models, across any hyperscalers. And as you see, even last week, the announcement with Anthropic using facilities, on-prem facilities from xAI, which also tells you that multi-cloud is very, very real because of capacity constraints. So the data layer is there to stay. LLMs are there to stay. And when you want to create agents, you want a great harness layer from LangChain.
And I think this trio of things fits really nicely together. We've done a bunch in the open source. The community's done a bunch in the open source, which now we're trying to make more prominent, build into Langsmith deployments. A number of customers are already using it together. I think you already mentioned Adobe as one. Could you maybe talk about the things that they're doing and how they're using some of those things?
Right, so Adobe had a lot of unstructured data, has a lot of unstructured data. They have built many products using MongoDB. Adobe Experience Manager, and I can go through many, many lists because they have, they provide what they call digital experience or experience cloud. And as they were building agents, they're saying, okay, if we are using LangChain, multiple technologies from LangChain, can we make sure that the retrieval is super fast? And by using LangChain products with us, now they are saying the senior software engineer who has built this agentic layer, the comment from that engineer was, now LLM is the bottleneck, not the harness or the data layer. And for me, like that's the thing, that we want to make agents really work, because if agents are slow and then don't give you accurate answers, what's the point of doing all this?
You talked about kind of like the model labs and how they're using you, the startups, the enterprises. I'm curious, in your view, in the long run, will their use cases start to look more similar or more different from each other?
This is one area. So when I meet all these customers on a regular basis, I ask them a very simple question. I say, because if you think from a customer's perspective, they are trying to have agents in 3 buckets. Okay, bear with me. Bucket number 1, employee-facing. All these co-pilots, I'm doing some productivity, I'm trying to re-engineer my process, and I'm building an agent that will go and access multiple data sources, I'll do search, whatever. So that's employee-facing. I'll tell you as a CEO, when people say that, hey, I built an agent that's employee-facing and maybe give me 5, 10% productivity, it's very like meh. I'm like, okay, it's great. Thank you for building it, but that didn't get me excited. Then you have maybe partner-facing. Oh, we created this agent partner-facing, and we have multiple partners. We are this type of a company. And then last, super important, is customer-facing. And the question I ask is, have you created customer-facing agent at scale? And now when you talk to, I was with a very large insurance company that uses MongoDB, and they have not. It's the simple answer. They have been on lots of agents that are employee-facing. And I said, why not? And it comes down to, hey, we currently work with this hyperscaler, and they have a very opinionated framework that they want us to use, okay? Then we have all the policies, insurance policies, and all that data in MongoDB. And then we are trying to figure out which models to use. And CJ, if we are going to approve somebody's insurance or somebody's claim, we do want human in the loop. So the agent can do multiple things right away. If it's truly customer-facing, there are 50 million plus customers. And then when we roll out functionality in production, we want to make sure our evaluation before we even do that is rock solid. That's where the biggest bang for the buck is. And I asked them, I was trying to be funny, but it didn't land, is that I said, how annoying must it be for you that you have insurance agents, which are humans, and then everybody comes and tells you about building agents? Do you not get confused? And it's like, okay, CJ, I've heard this before many times. But if they can create those agents that can provide you insurance claim, add a dependent or a driver or whatever the case might be, change the claim, that's the high bar for them. And they can even create new products that are truly customer-facing. That changes entirely how the CEO thinks about agentic evolution for their 50 million plus customers.
And just to make sure I understand, is the blocker for that the LLM capabilities, or just the confidence that they have in the system, or the regulations they encounter?
So the first I would tell you, and I'm sure all of you face this every day, what agentic stack they should build on. There's so much changes happening. Hyperscaler, they use one particular hyperscaler. They're in multiple regions in that hyperscaler for MongoDB. And they are coming up with this opinionated thing, and they're like, should we be locked in? Or should we look at something like a LangChain? Should we try to have a particular frontier model? Or for sub-agents, I should use different models? They are experimenting, but things are moving so fast that they don't know what to take. So that's number one. Number two, because they are an extremely regulated industry, whether it's them or banking, how do you do the actual, can you replay, if you give this insurance rate, did the agent discriminate, did the agent not discriminate? So all the governance, security, or while I was going back and forth asking questions to get my policy, if the agent crashed, what does that mean? And now how do a human calls them? Should they do a AI call and voice call, agent call? These are real problems for 50 million plus customers.
You mentioned the agent stack and all of the choice that can come with it.
And it's changing, right?
Yeah, and so I'm curious for your take on this, because we've talked about kind of like this open stack and open ecosystem, but when you do that, there are so many different choices, and I think, and it's all changing, and so I think that presents a little bit almost of like paralysis of what to do and how to choose things. So how do you think about giving people kind of like a happy path to get to production while maintaining that optionality and that openness?
Yeah. The thing is, these customers, the large enterprise customers, that's where we serve. So MongoDB, for example, is in 75+% of Fortune 100. So we get to talk to these customers all the time. And the biggest challenge that I'm seeing, Harrison, on that point is they thought 2025 was the year to create agents at scale for their customers, to create that agents at scale. That didn't pan out to be true, okay, for these large enterprises. Now, in 2026, they are feeling that some of the technologies around observability is maturing. Some of the technologies around harness is maturing. Yes, everybody wants to play in that, but they feel those technologies are maturing. And what they are telling their engineering team from AI lifecycle development perspective, let's just go with X, do rapid iteration, and figure out if this works, and then can we roll it out in production. So 2026 is a little better than 25. 25, I mean, this customer told me, I'm sure you guys have heard this before, the number of agents, or agent washing as they called it, was crazy in this large account. And they're like, hey, CJ, I wash my agents more than I do laundry. I said, okay, that's TMI. But the point was that it was just disrupting very fast. So I feel that in 26, it's a lot more stable.
One of the things that I think comes with more agents is more token spend and more cost. And I think we've seen a bunch in the news recently about, in particular for coding agents, about costs of those just increasing dramatically. How are you seeing, whether it's inside Mongo or inside of the companies that you partner with, what are you seeing around there? How are people thinking about that? How are people getting a handle on that?
So I have my board meeting next week, and they're going to ask me the same question. So let's see if this works.
I'm helping you practice.
Yes. Let's see if this works. So we rolled out one of the coding agents and to the entire engineering team. I'll share just rough benchmark numbers. So one of the things that we are really trying to understand first, in an engineer's week, what % of their time they actually do coding, and is that now accelerated because of coding agent? The answer is yes, right? But for us as a database company, and you have an extremely technical engineering team as well, for us as a database company, distributed system engineers, the coding time is actually 20 to 25% in a week. There's a lot of other things they do, code review. I can go all of that, team meetings to make sure the design and subsystems work well, and so on. That window has shrunk. So if you look at the numerator, the amount of code that is getting produced is now more because we are using coding assistant, 100%. And then when you look at the denominator on the productivity, you are saying, okay, out of 8 hours that the engineer actually used to code out of 40, maybe now we are saving 5 to 6 hours, okay? Or maybe 3 or 4 hours. So that's the math right now. But then I'm seeing the token cost going up significantly. So what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, here is an engineer that is producing more code, so that's great. But now my cost of that engineer has increased on the tools she's using. So you put that together, which we are presenting to the board next week, is the cost has gone up, But what is the output? The output is a lot more features or new products, which hopefully we can sell more. So we are innovating faster, but it's at a higher cost right now, okay? And that economics has to improve, otherwise it's not sustainable.
Have you thought of like a token budget per engineer, or is it getting to that where you need to start thinking of that?
Here is my thing, that if they are, so right now, I asked the team last week, so if you just look at last week for the engineers, and this is over a large sample size, right? We have closer to 2,000 engineers at MongoDB. If you look at last week, 70% of the code that got checked in was written by the coding assistant, 7-0, okay? Okay, that's great. So it kind of scares me a little bit because then I'm like, okay, what is the token bill? And it's pretty high. So, and is that because they are not writing prompts properly and that whole engineering around it? But we'll figure that out. But that cost, but if they're producing 35% more code so that we can build additional features or products like some of the products you announced yesterday, I'm okay with that. But then I have to really figure out, if next year I was going to hire 30% more engineers, do I really need to do that, right? Because now my engineers are 30% more productive. So that's how I'm looking at the cost, human cost with the token cost, and what does that really mean?
One of the things we announced yesterday was Context Hub, and along with it, the open memory kind of like partnership to figure out what a standard for memory might look like.
Yeah.
What do you think memory for agents will look like? And I'm assuming the answer is yes, but like, why do you think that standard needs to be open?
So this idea, I think Andreessen Horowitz had a blog today, system of intelligence, right? There was always a system of record, system of action, this, that, but system of intelligence. And with agents, agents are a system of intelligence. Now, the question is, anytime you want to create a true agent that is customer-facing, your data layer, harness, becomes super critical besides the LLM or multiple LLMs you may use or SLMs you may use. So from my standpoint, Harrison, is that I think of that system of intelligence, and when you look at that memory or the context, that layer could be a lot bigger than we think it is today. Needs to have right context and memory so that the agent can make real-time decision and is fed real-time. I absolutely do not believe that these are the kind of things you can build on top of a data warehouse, because data warehouses were always created as a 15 minutes late or 30 minutes late where you can ask business questions, versus if your agent is customer-facing, airlines, banks, you want to make decision fast, so this context or a context plus memory is going to continue to become bigger, become super relevant, and will become the high ground by which agents will provide the outcome, whatever you designed it for.
You say this context and this memory will grow bigger. What will help it grow bigger? Like, how can enterprises start to grow this context layer, start to grow this memory? What are the blockers there? Is it a technical thing? Is it an organizational thing?
I think that is definitely a technical thing, because people are, how much data do I need in that context/memory so agent can make an outcome, mortgage rate, real-time bank fraud transaction, or something like that in agentic commerce or something like that. You need like really high-speed answers or actions that you need to take. And for that requires always lots of data. And do you have that data in whatever you want to call it, short-term memory, and context? And every enterprise that we speak to, when they are trying to create agents, every single enterprise, that comes from so many data sources. Then how do you really build that? And this old way of doing software via UI, right? The nirvana is over time, you have the agent, you have the context layer, and you're done.
Okay, so on that note, yeah, software via UI. I feel like one of the things that has been talked a lot about recently is headless APIs. Basically, you see Salesforce doing this, which I think is a great example. Where do you think that trend goes, and how are you as Mongo as a company thinking of leaning into that?
Yeah, so I will say first thing that we are doing right now is a lot of these companies that sell to us, right? We are only signing our CIO. She's fantastic, very technical. We are only signing 1 year at a time because this old way of doing seat-based model, I mean, you see what's going on right now, and investors ask me, hey, CJ, are you going to Jack Dorsey MongoDB? I mean, it's an offensive question on multiple fronts, but the thing is, how many people we need to hire more? We just don't know with AI productivity and so on as we build out agents and so on. So one is we are signing 1 year at a time. Second is the seat-based model just does not work because I just don't know how and where I'm going to hire year 2 or year 3, so long-term contracts are gone. And then the second thing is I've asked my CIO that I want to cut. We have, say, X number of SaaS vendors we are using for financial, CRM, whatever the case might be. I want to cut that in half. And I want to build things internally because if I have the right context layer, right orchestration, we know the data layer, of course, will be MongoDB. Why do I need to pay all these SaaS companies X, Y, and Z?
What SaaS companies do you think are in a good position to survive people thinking like you are right now, and which might be at a disadvantage?
I'm not going to answer that question. From my standpoint, I think if you are vertical SaaS, where you have a lot of domain expertise that have been built in for life sciences, insurance, and all that, I think that is a defensible moat when you have a vertical SaaS, or whether you have vertical functional SaaS, you do it for legal department or things like that. That is definitely a moat you have. On the horizontal SaaS, my standpoint is if you are at that UI layer or other layer where that's your value add on really cool UI, you are at a higher disruption risk versus loss of data in system of record that is very proprietary to you.
Is that also where the vertical nature of things, is that also where you see a lot of the advantage for startups coming? For all the startups folks in the room who are thinking of building in the space, would you advise them to find a vertical and build into it? Or what other advice would you have for them?
Yeah, here's my thing. So we use a vertical AI native startup, okay? And every time I meet that firm, I ask them this question: what is your real moat on top of the foundational model, right? What's your real moat? And it's interesting. Sometimes they will say, hey, we have all this knowledge of this particular industry that has been built into how we have built the product on top of the LLM, A, B, or C. And then we have this forward deployed engineering team that will come and get you to value not in months, but in days or weeks. And that's our moat. And that's an okay answer, but not a great answer, right? To be able to say, because then I worry on the background that if those frontier model companies decide to move up the stack for that particular use case, what does that really mean, right? And that's why I'm like, okay, I understand what you're saying and I respect it. Obviously, you guys are working super hard, but I'm going to only sign with you for a year because I want that moat to be clear. Otherwise, it doesn't work for us. So,
what do you think a good moat for a Gen AI native startup is?
I actually have a very high opinion. You should have multiple use cases, and those multiple use cases need to work with each other really well.
What's an example?
So the example is, you should have a platform mindset. So say you are doing a use case for finance, and you're doing a use case for HR. You're doing both, and there is a pattern that it works really well for the industry that you sell to, say, high-tech vertical like MongoDB or LangChain or so on. The things that you provide should work with each other. If I buy one product from you, okay, it works well, gives me 20% productivity, whatever it is. I buy the other agentic product from you, it gives me 20% productivity. But if I combine the two, it is 1 + 1 is more than 2, and you become a platform that I use that works really well with each other for me as a customer. That's the high ground.
Interesting. I feel like there is this idea of startups as they grow will always become a platform if they grow and live long enough. Do you think that's happening earlier in the AI era or faster or?
I have not seen it yet. I have not seen it, and I think that is the opportunity that you have because everybody, our IT team, our tech team, they're all looking at first principles to say, the question I have asked them to ask the vendors who sell to us is, if we were starting today, would I buy this and why? And do you have anything else that I can retire? So right now, a lot of our very simple use case, but like even coming back to ElevenLabs last week, when you speak to Mati and the team, they say, okay, voice, meaning speech to text, the killer use case was customer support, right? But it could be sales, it could be other things, and now you become that platform where I know how to build agent, and I build the next agent at a fractional cost, say for MongoDB, and that just works.
And for them, for ElevenLabs, that common thing is the voice models.
That's the voice becomes the moat, and they are very, very good. I mean, 74 languages, and they told me this story that they were created because the founders are Polish, and they saw a really bad dubbed movie, Hollywood movie that was in Polish, and they're like, hey, this has to be solved.
All right.
Yes.
I guess we need to make a lot more of poorly dubbed movies so we get a lot more ElevenLabs out there. Thank you so much for joining us, CJ.
Thank you.
I learned a lot.
It was great being with you. Thank you very much. See ya.
Thanks, CJ.